This is 2 Echo Zero Bravo Mike Tango returning. Hello YouTube, I'm Ben. My call sign is 2 Echo Zero Bravo Mike Tango, and in today's video I want to take you through some of the basic settings of one of these, the Baofeng UV-5R radio. For most of us, the first radio we buy is something cheap off Amazon, and for me I got my Baofeng UV-5R for about £25 from Amazon before I had a license, which meant that I couldn't actually use it to transmit, but I could use it to listen. And a question that I often get is, what is the best frequency to listen on if you've never had a radio before, you've picked one of these up and you want to use it somehow, you want to hear what's going on? Well, in this video I hope to take you through a few of the basic things that you need to know to get this set up for whatever your local area is, so that you can hear some of the activity from local radio hams in your area, and hopefully that will inspire you to want to get involved, to take your foundation course or whatever the course is in your country and be involved in the amateur radio community close to you. Well, the first thing to say is the amateur radio hobby is a very broad hobby, and there's an awful lot to take in, and it might feel like a little bit of a steep learning curve. I would say enjoy that learning curve. We've all learnt along the way, and there's lots of people out there in the amateur radio world that would be delighted to help you along the way. I certainly personally would. Do just leave a comment or a question in the comment section below, and I will come back to you and answer as best as I can. But what I hope to do today is try and help you to understand the basic functionality of one of these radios. First things first, amateur radio is a hobby through which you can communicate with people all around the world. But I hate to disappoint you, this radio is not the radio for talking to people all around the world, although this radio is a really helpful radio to get started and talk to people locally where you live. The UV-5R has an output of about 5 watts, and 5 watts with an antenna that's actually very short considering the wavelength that it's using. It's, as you can see here, only about 15 centimeters long, but you're using it for either the 70 centimeter band, that's the band that starts with a 4, like 440,000, or even the 2 meter band, which starts with something like 145, like 145. 500 would be the 2 meter band. This antenna here is neither 70 centimeters nor 2 meters. Also, on the UHF VHF frequencies, that's the 2 meter and the 70 centimeter band that this radio uses, they are pretty much line of sight, which means if you were to take this radio up a very tall mountain, you'd be able to get quite far with it. But if, like me, you're sat on the outskirts of a town, you can really only expect to get a few miles using this radio, and therefore receiving also only a few miles. As a result, if you've got one of these, you can't really expect to get further than maybe 10 miles maximum, something like that on a good day, but realistically 2 to 3 miles is the normal sort of range for one of these radios. So what you need to do is optimize this radio to listen to the amateur radio community in your local area rather than trying to listen to things from miles and miles away. Otherwise you'll just be disappointed. So there are 2 different frequencies that I would suggest you program into this radio so that you can listen locally to what's going on. The first frequency is really straightforward. It is the calling frequency. The frequency is 145.500. So on the 2 meter band, using this radio or any other radio, people will quite often put out calls on the calling frequency just to say, hey, is anyone out there? Does anyone want to talk to me? And the way they would do that is by putting out what we call a CQ call. So they would say something like, CQ, 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 this is 2 Echo Zero Bravo Mike Tango, or whatever their call sign is, calling CQ on 2 meters, standing by for any calls. And then you might hear someone saying, oh yes, I want to talk to that person. So they'll say, oh, 2E0 BMT, this is, you know, whichever call sign they are, and they'll start a conversation. However, the calling frequency is only to make initial contact with one another. Once 2 amateur radio operators have made the initial contact, they will select a second frequency to go to. So they might say, shall we go up to 145.550? Or shall we go down to 145.400 or whatever else? And you can then follow them up or down to then hear the rest of their conversation. It's quite common if you're using just a small handheld radio with a small antenna that you might only be able to hear one side of that conversation. But in the world of amateur radio, that is quite common. Particularly when you get onto the other bands, you'll almost certainly only be able to hear half of the conversation at any one time. So get used to that. But if there's two people that are both very close to you, you might well be able to hear both sides of that conversation. But the initial contact will be established on 145.500. So my advice would be to have your radio tuned to 145.500. And you never know, you might hear someone calling CQ. Secondly, by far the best frequency to listen to is going to be your local repeater. You probably live just a couple of miles away from a repeater, particularly if you live in a built-up area. There's almost certainly going to be a repeater on either 2 meters or 70 centimeters, the two bands that this radio can operate on, local to you. The way a repeater works is that a repeater keeper, usually an experienced ham radio operator, applies to the Ofcom to get the permission to have a local repeater. A repeater is essentially two radios that are connected to each other, usually mounted in a good position, like high up on a hill or on a bit of high ground or at the top of a block of flats or something like that. The idea is that one radio listens and another transmits. So what happens is I sit here with my little handheld radio and transmit to another radio on a hill a couple of miles away. That radio on a hill a couple of miles away listens to my transmission and simultaneously retransmits it. What's the advantage of that? Well, it retransmits it from a bit of high ground a couple of miles away, and it transmits it with more power than I'm allowed to use. The result is that my little transmission from my handheld is then broadcast over a much wider area for other ham radio operators to listen to and respond to. The way this works is that I transmit on one frequency and the repeater listens on that frequency, but then it transmits on a slightly different frequency. As a result, this radio needs to be programmed at the same time to two different frequencies, one to transmit on and another to receive on. Because of course, if the repeater was transmitting and receiving on the same frequency, it would feed back. It would be transmitting and it would hear itself, and there'd be all sorts of problems. So as a result, there is what's called a repeater frequency shift. That is to say, a shift between what it's transmitting on and what it's receiving on. So we need to find out what the frequency of the local repeater is that it receives on and what it transmits on. And we need to listen to that which it transmits on and transmit to that which it receives on. And that way you can have conversations with other amateur radio operators locally. If you're not licensed yet, you can program your transmitter in ready to receive on the frequency that your local repeater transmits on, and that way you'll be able to hear lots of conversations, and because they happen through the repeater, you'll be able to hear both sides of the conversation. Just to make things a little bit more complicated, your local repeater will also use a tone. Now, you can't hear that tone, but the radios can hear it. It's below the range of human hearing. And the purpose of it is this tone simply indicates to the repeater that's listening that the signal that you're giving it is one that it needs to repeat out to everyone else listening. And likewise, it's good to have that tone programmed into your radio so that your radio doesn't hear interference or people broadcasting on similar frequencies. It will ignore all that unless it hears the specific tone that's involved. So therefore, as we program our radio, we will need to bear in mind, not only do we need to put in a repeater shift so that the transmit and the receive is on a slightly different frequency, we will also need to program in those tones so that our radios know when it is that they're meant to be listening and when it is that they're not meant to be listening. So let's have a go at programming this radio. Firstly, to that 145.500 calling frequency for VHF so that we can hear people calling CQ, and secondly to our local repeater. Before we can program it to our local repeater, though, we're going to have to go on the websites and find where our local repeater is. Hopefully it'll be within just a couple of miles, and also what the frequencies are for both transmit, receive, what the frequency shift is, whether that's in a positive direction, that is to say you shift up or do you shift down, and also what the tones are so that we can fully program our radio. So firstly, what you need to do is go onto your web browser and type in Repeaterbook.com. This is a great website where you can find your local repeaters. We're going to be looking just for repeaters on either the 430 or the 145 frequencies. That is the 70 centimeters and the 2 meter frequencies, because that's all that our UV-5R can do. Okay, we need to go on rest of the world because I'm not in North America. Obviously, if you're in North America, click on that. Click on the map or find your nation on the helpful list below. I'm in the United Kingdom, so we need to click on United Kingdom and it will take you to another sub-site, and you want to go on proximity. It's easiest to search by proximity, and then you can either put in your latitude and longitude or just your postcode. I'm going to pop in the first 3 letters of my postcode, and once I've done that, it'll just bring up all those repeaters that are within 25 kilometers of my home address, which is really helpful to see. And as you can see here, the top one on the list is just 3 kilometers away, and there's a couple slightly further afield, but all 3 of those are on the 430 or the 145 frequency, so that's all that we need to know. Let's try with this one, GB3SA. That's my local repeater. There's the downlink frequency. That is the frequency that transmits on. The uplink, that's what I need to transmit on. The offset is plus 7.6 megahertz, and there's the tone as well, and this is kept by G8IOA. That's Phil, our repeater keeper. He's a gentleman and a legend for keeping us all together over lockdown. So let's have a go at programming one of these radios. So the first thing to get your head around with these radios is that there is 2 different functions, a channel mode and a frequency mode, and you toggle between the channel mode, which is your pre-installed memory, and your frequency mode by pressing this red VFO MR button here.
Channel mode.
So that's channel mode.
Frequency mode.
And that's frequency mode. So we need to be in frequency mode, which I now am. The other thing that you need to bear in mind is that it constantly listens on 2 different frequencies simultaneously. And so therefore you need to select which of these 2 frequencies you want to be your main listening channel by pressing this A or B button. You can see that arrow flicks between which one. It doesn't really matter for this which one it's on, but it's just useful to know that there are 2 different sections, frequency and channel mode, using this button, and the A and B, which is the top or the bottom level here, using the A and B button. So firstly, what we need to do is clear out 2 channels. So I'm going to suggest that we install the calling frequency on channel 1 and the repeater on channel 2. Now you might want to have lots of different repeaters, so you could do channel 3 and channel 4 and channel 5 as well. I've already got some things on channel 1 and 2, so I'm going to use 101 and 102. So whenever you see me doing something on channel 101, you might want to do it on channel 1, but it doesn't really matter which channels you do it on as long as you remember. So going into menu, we're going to go to number 28. Can you see this little flashing number here? Currently on 11. You can either go up and down using these up and down buttons up to 28, or you can just type in 28. This is to delete some channels. So press menu again. It says delete channel, and then you can flick through to the channel that you want to delete. So I'm going to just delete everything that's on channel 101 and 102, just so that I know there's nothing there. So 101 is now confirmed, and so back into there. Delete channel. Should have done it when I was there, shouldn't I? Let's me nip down to 102 and confirm. So I now know that channel 101 and channel 102 are clear of any memory. So in channel 101, I'm going to put the calling frequency. So I press exit to come back to this. I'm already in frequency mode. So if I put in 145500, so that's 145.500. And that's all I need to do with this one. I'm going to go menu and then 27, which is just down 1 from where I was, and menu again.
Memory channel.
And then I'm going to go down to channel 101. That's where I want my calling channel. And then I'm going to press menu twice.
Receiving memory channel. Transmitting
3 times, I mean. And then that is now done. So now if I toggle into, so I pressed exit there. If I toggle back into the channel mode. And at the top one, if I go up to channel, it's already on it, 101, that's the one I've just programmed in. I'm now on 145.500. So that is now done. Now, repeaters are slightly more interesting and difficult because of what I've said about the offset and about the tones. So we need to do a bit more programming on this one. So back onto frequency mode.
Frequency mode.
Using the websites to look up your local repeater's frequency, you need to enter the receiving frequency. So that is the frequency that your radio will listen on. It is therefore the frequency that the local repeater will transmit on. So I know that my local repeater is on a frequency of 4309625, and it works out the 5 for you. You just see that little tiny 5 there. So that's the frequency that it receives on. Now what we need to do is put the offset in. So my local repeater has an offset of 7.6 megahertz positive. So that's 2 different settings. So we need to go menu and then down to number 26. Now the offset is in here. So you press menu and then type in the offset. So 7.6, it would be 007600. So that's an offset of 7.6, and then you would press menu to confirm. And then what we need to do is tell it which direction that offset is. So is that a positive offset or a negative offset? As in, does it want to be transmitting above or below that? So we go into menu and then to 25, and this SFTD, I think that stands for shift frequency direction or something like that. And you can choose either positive, negative or off. So we want positive for my particular repeater. Again, you'll need to find this out on the website, but then press menu to confirm, and you'll see this little positive appears up there to say that the shift is on in a positive direction, and that's the local repeater kicking in. So let me we're obviously on the right channel. Next, what we need to do is set up some tones so that we're able to open that particular repeater, and we need to do that by looking at what the tone is on the repeater, and in this case it is 118.8. So we go into menu and then down to 13. So this is the transmit CTCS. It's currently off, so we need to go menu and then down or up to, you'll see not every frequency is there, but all of the ones for the tones are, and we need to find 118.8. So there we go, menu to confirm. And then we need to go down to 11 for receiving CTCS. So some repeaters need both of those putting in. I always put them in just in case. So menu, and again, 118.8. And menu to confirm. And then you'll see this CT on the left there. So that essentially is the squelch setting, so that the radio won't come on unless it hears that tone. So now we've got the frequency in here, the plus on there and the CT on there. That's everything we need to do. We just need to now save it to the menu. So menu 27 and memory channel. So press menu and then go up, and this time I should have gone down. It'd be quicker if I go down. So this is where I'm going to put mine on 102. So on 101 I've already got the calling frequency, and 102, and then you have to press menu a few times so it both receives and transmits and saves both the receive and the transmit memory. So listen. So that's the receiving memory done, and then do it again.
Transmitting memory.
So it's done receiving memory and transmitting memory. So that's now done. So pressing exit, you're still in frequency mode, but if we go and press this button now and go into channel mode, you'll see I've got 102 here, and I'm going to now, so I've got 101. So that's the calling frequency on 101. And then if I press A or B, I come down to this one here, and I've got 102 there. So as it stands at the moment, in this setup, I will hear anyone calling CQ on the calling frequency because that's written on my screen here, but I've also got the local repeater saved in here, so if anything happens on the local repeater I will hear it. At the moment I am listening to the bottom frequency, but if nothing's happening on the bottom frequency and something starts happening on the top frequency, the radio will automatically switch it over for me. So this is how you would need it set up, listening first and foremost to your repeater, but also to the local calling frequency. Now, if you have a license and you can press this push to talk button, you can now just give a short transmission and make sure that the repeater opens up, hears you and reports back to you. And you'll be able to hear that simply because it'll make some bleeps of Morse code to identify itself, or even just open up the squelch on your radio in return. So let's try that now. So there we go. It was a little bit crackly, but that's predominantly because I'm sat inside with all these lights and computers around me and things. But that shows that that is now working. And likewise, if someone else were to transmit, I would then hear it. You'll see when I push the push to talk button, the frequency changes on the screen because it changes by the 7.6 megahertz offset. So I'll show you that again. See how that added and went up to 38 point something for exactly that reason. So that is now listening to the repeater and listening for the calling frequency. That is the best setup you can hope for when you get one of these for the first time. And if you then leave it turned on, you will soon start hearing people talking on your repeater and maybe even calling on the calling frequency. Well, I hope that's been helpful. If you've bought one of these and followed this step-by-step guide and got your local repeater in here, leave it on monitoring. That is just to say ticking over, listening in the background, and I can guarantee you within 24 hours you will hear some conversations through your local repeater. I hope that video has been helpful to you. If you want to see more of my videos, do have a look at my channel or even subscribe to the channel, which cheers me on as I make these videos. If you've liked this video and found it helpful, click the like button. And until next time, I'm Ben. I'm 2 Echo Zero Bravo Mike Tango, off and clear, 73. This is 2 Echo Zero Bravo Mike Tango returning.